Imagine you're sitting in the passenger seat. The engine is running, something good is playing at a decent volume, and outside the road opens up straight and empty in front of you. You can feel the sun coming through the window on your right arm, smell the leather, sense the weight of the car moving beneath you. Everything is fine, except you're not driving, and something you can't quite name feels genuinely, persistently wrong. Most people would call it a control issue and move on. Maybe they'd say he's difficult. Maybe they'd laugh about it at dinner. But there's something older happening here, something more structural, something that has far more to do with how a particular kind of mind is built than with how a man relates to the people around him. This tells us something fascinating about a very specific type of human mind. And if you pay attention, what we're about to explore says considerably more about the human condition than the surface topic suggests. Personality psychology has spent decades documenting a trait that appears with striking consistency in men who genuinely cannot tolerate being passengers, high levels of what researchers call conscientiousness. Not perfectionism, exactly. Something closer to a structural need for agency. These are the men who notice a leaking faucet and feel a physical pull toward fixing it before they've even set down their bag. They don't run late, ever. They show up with the directions already memorized, the parking already researched, the route already optimized in their head during breakfast. And when they're sitting in a moving vehicle that someone else is operating, their right foot searches instinctively for a brake pedal that isn't there. Not because they distrust the driver, because their nervous system was built to respond, not to wait. What happens in the mind of these men when the wheel is taken from them is not stubbornness. It's something considerably more ancient than that. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the Hungarian-American psychologist best known for his decades of research on flow states, described how human beings reach their highest levels of well-being when there's a precise match between their skill level and the challenge directly in front of them. Not too easy, not too difficult. Exactly calibrated. Driving, for this kind of person, is not about getting somewhere. It's one of the rare spaces left in modern life where mind and body converge into a single continuous action. Every decision, every micro-adjustment, every reading of the traffic around them happens in real time, with no delay, no bureaucracy, no intermediary layer between intention and result. The world responds directly to their hands. When someone else drives, that channel closes completely. And a brain that was prepared to work, that had organized itself around the task of moving through space, is suddenly left with nothing to do but watch and assess someone else doing it, which, for this particular mind, lands somewhere between frustrating and genuinely uncomfortable. But here is where it gets considerably more interesting, because this isn't really about control in the way we typically use that word. There's something more precise, more layered, operating beneath the surface of the obvious explanation. The psychologist Julian Rotter introduced in the 1960s what he called locus of control, the degree to which a person believes that the events in their life are the direct result of their own actions versus the product of outside forces, luck, or other people's decisions. People with a strong internal locus of control are not necessarily more successful in measurable ways, but they do move through the world with a consistent, deeply held sense that what happens to them is meaningfully connected to what they do. For them, surrendering the wheel is not just physical discomfort. It's a small but real betrayal of their operating system. It's accepting, even for 40 minutes on a highway with good visibility and light traffic, that what happens next isn't up to them. And their entire psychology is organized around the opposite premise. So, what does that actually feel like from the inside? There are moments in anyone's life when that sensation of events moving forward without your input becomes genuinely difficult to carry. Someone who just received a medical diagnosis they didn't choose and cannot negotiate with. A person navigating the slow end of a marriage they didn't want to end, watching decisions get made around them. A man who recently lost his father and is still processing the strange, disorienting fact that the world simply kept moving afterward without asking permission. For people in those moments, the car is not transportation. The car is the one remaining space where order can still be restored on demand, where causes still produce predictable effects, where turning the wheel right means the car goes right, every time, without exception, without loss. And that reliability, that physical, mechanical, unconditional reliability, becomes something closer to emotional necessity than to preference. But here is the curious thing, the thing that changes the entire frame. Many of these men admit, when asked carefully and without judgment, that what bothers them most about being a passenger has almost nothing to do with the other person's driving. It's the interior silence that appears when they have nothing to do, because driving, for them, functions as a form of active meditation, a sanctioned way of being fully present without having to explain why. The road requires just enough attention to quiet everything else. And without that specific rhythm, without that particular kind of engagement, the mind begins drifting toward territory they'd rather not navigate. Old conversations, unresolved decisions, the things they carry but rarely discuss. The car was never just a car. It was a container for a certain kind of peace. This connects directly to something the developmental psychologist Erik Erikson identified as one of the central concerns of adult life, what he called generativity. The deep, persistent human need to feel that one is contributing, producing, leaving something useful behind, not for legacy necessarily, just for the immediate, daily confirmation that one's presence makes a practical difference. For many men, particularly in cultures where masculine identity is still built substantially around usefulness, competence, and action, driving is one of the most consistently available ways to feel necessary. Not dramatically, not heroically, just functionally. I know the way. I can read the road. I'll get everyone there. It sounds small when you say it out loud. It isn't small. What these men are doing, often without any conscious awareness of it, is maintaining a daily practice of competence. And competence, the psychologist Robert White argued, as early as 1959, is not a luxury for human beings. It's a fundamental psychological need. We are built to feel effective. We are built to interact with our environment and have it respond. When that feedback loop is removed, even temporarily, even in something as ordinary as a car ride, something registers the absence. Now, here is the paradox that sits at the center of all of this. The thing that initially seems contradictory and then, once you see it, seems obvious. These men, the ones who apparently cannot function without their hands on something, who need the wheel, who quietly suffer through every passenger seat mile, they tend to be precisely the most composed when real, uncontrollable things happen. When the emergency is actual, when the car ahead brakes without warning on a wet road, when something goes genuinely wrong and there is no checklist to follow, these are the minds that don't scatter. Because they've spent years without calling it training, reading environments, and preparing responses before the need for them arrives. Their discomfort in the passenger seat isn't anxiety in the clinical sense. It's readiness with no outlet. It's a system designed for engagement sitting in forced observation mode. They don't hate being passengers because they're afraid. They hate it because they're ready, and there's nothing to be ready for. What these men teach the rest of us, and they would almost certainly be uncomfortable hearing it framed this way, is something worth sitting with. In a culture that has become extraordinarily efficient at converting us into passive receivers, at turning the journey into dead time, at filling every unscheduled moment with content, with noise, with someone else's choices playing on a screen, in that culture, these men are doing something that looks like stubbornness from the outside, but functions like resistance from the inside. They are insisting, sometimes without any elegance about it, on being the ones who move, not just the ones who arrive. There is a kind of soul in that insistence, a refusal to be merely transported through one's own life. And beneath the frustration they cause their passengers, beneath the slightly too tight grip, and the unnecessary commentary on lane choices, there is something genuinely worth respecting. These are people who have not made peace with irrelevance, who still believe, on some level that precedes language, that their presence in a situation should change the situation. That showing up means something more than physically occupying a space. That's not a personality flaw that needs correcting. That's a human being fighting, in the only language immediately available, against one of the quietest and most pervasive fears of modern life, the fear that things will unfold exactly the same way whether you're there or not. The man who cannot let go of the wheel doesn't have a problem with trust. He has a particular, hard-won relationship with agency, with time, with his own place in the movement of things. He has found, in something as ordinary and unglamorous as driving on a Tuesday afternoon, a language for expressing something he would never sit down and say directly. That he wants to matter, that he wants to be useful, that he wants to feel, at least in this one small and mechanical and utterly reliable way, that the world responds when he acts on it. That's not just a man who prefers to drive. It's a human story about what it means to still feel like you're steering something, even when everything else feels like it's moving without you.